It's wonderful to be in worship with you on this day, the third Sunday in the season of Lent. We are continuing our series called Open to Peace, and it's based on the prayer of St. Francis. And today we have prayed the prayer together. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. And today we're focusing on where there is doubt, faith. Where there is doubt, faith. And we've talked about doubt a lot through the years. We talk about it almost every year when the text of the disciple Thomas comes up. Thomas, who got that very unfortunate nickname, Doubting Thomas. Because Thomas was a person who stayed in there with the disciples, stayed a part of the community of faith, and came to faith himself. We've talked about how doubt has a very positive role in our lives. It's doubt that keeps us from being taken in. It's doubt that gives us an appropriate skepticism. It's doubt that gives us a curiosity, an itch to learn more and to resolve issues in our own mind and to explore further. Doubt has a really important role in our lives. And so does fear. Because we're thinking this morning about the role of fear. Fear has an important role. Imagine someone with no fear. Do you want to fly in a plane piloted by someone who is without fear? Well, probably not. You want that person to have a healthy fear. Do you want to ride in a car with someone who is fearless? Probably not. Fear keeps us from doing stupid things, if you will. Fear has its role in our lives that is protective. Fear leads us to make appropriate precautions. And so when we talk about doubt and when we talk about fear, we're not talking about all fear is bad and all doubt is bad. But both of these things are often contrasted with faith. With faith. And there is a kind of doubt that has as an effect creating fear within us and exacerbating fear and making it larger than it needs to be. It's the doubt that says, I don't think there's anyone in this with me. I think I'm on my own, and I doubt that I have the resources to handle what's going on in my life. It is that kind of doubt that causes a sort of spiral into a debilitating kind of and corrosive kind of fear. So we're thinking about that this morning, thinking about doubt in those terms. And we're thinking about faith. And faith is essentially trust. In almost every place that the word appears in Scripture, you can replace it with the word trust, and it means essentially the same thing. Rarely is faith the equivalent of belief and belief only. It's a certain kind of belief. It is a kind of belief that is willing to put one's whole weight on that, one's whole self on that belief. You know the old illustration that preachers have used for, I guess, centuries. The difference between faith and doubt, faith and belief. Belief is, I believe that chair will hold me up. That's it. I believe that chair will hold me up. Trust, of course, is going over and sitting down in the chair, right? It is that belief that goes the one step further. It's the belief that places oneself and all that is important on that belief. That's trust. That's trust. And so we have this story of Jesus and his disciples. They're on the Lake of Galilee. We usually call it the Sea of Galilee. Traditionally, it has that name. But it's a lake. It's a freshwater lake. It is about the size of Lake Tawakoni. It's a little larger than Tawakoni, if you know that lake. It's almost exactly the same size as Lake Ouachita, if you know that lake in Arkansas. So that gives you an idea of the size of of this lake. It's not really a huge body of water. It's a freshwater lake. It's 700 feet below sea level, and that makes it the lowest freshwater body of water in the world. And because it sits in a kind of bowl, it is prone to severe storms. When the wind whips, especially from the east, from the Golan Heights, down over the surface of the water, it can whip up waves. It can pile the water up in waves that can be ferocious. In 1992, 10-foot waves made their way into downtown Tiberias on the western shore and did a lot of damage. So don't be fooled by its being a small body of water. It can have terrifying storms. And that's what happens in our text for today. Jesus and his disciples are in a boat, and it's a small boat. It's a fishing boat on the Sea of Galilee, and they have this storm arise. And you can imagine that the waves are pounding the boat. In fact, the text says the boat is being swamped, and the disciples are terrified. And Jesus is asleep in the stern of the boat. I mean, all this is going on, and he's asleep. And so they begin to yell, "We're about to perish here. Don't you care?" And he arises from his sleep and he says, "Peace, be still." And all was still. And then he asks them a question. "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Do you still have no faith? I mean, after what you've seen, after what you've experienced, after what you have heard me say, after being with me for all this, you still don't trust? You don't have trust? Why are you afraid? Do you still not have faith? Trust. See, the opposite here of faith, of trust, is fear. The corrosive kind of fear. The fear that leads to panic, that leads to worse chaos than the storm is causing, that leads to an internal kind of turmoil, a terror that can be literally petrifying, that can be paralyzing. Fear. It's contrasted with faith. And so we're thinking this morning about fear, about its role in our lives. And it's the kind of doubt, aren't you even with us? Am I alone in this? Do you even care? That leads to the kind of fear that we're talking about. The early church must have experienced this story in a powerful way because they were afraid. They were terrified. They were experiencing the storms of persecution. In some places they were imprisoned. In other places, in a few instances, they were put to death. And they were shut out of the economic system in many communities, but because it required them to be a part of the guild, and the guilds would worship at the altars, worshiping the emperor as divine, and they refused to do that, and so they were shut out of that as people of faith. They were afraid, and they had reason to be afraid. But don't you know that they wondered, are you with us in this? Are you asleep at the switch? What's going on here? Do you even care? And the danger was that the storm without would create such a storm within that they would lose their faith, that they would lose that sense of trust, that they would be overcome by their fears. And so they put themselves in that boat, and they heard those comforting words, "Peace, be still." And they heard those challenging words, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Rembrandt painted this scene. He painted this scene in the very midst of the storm, when the waves are terrifying. It's dark, as his paintings almost always are. And the boat is almost at a 45-degree angle on the waves. The disciples' faces are terrified. The storm is blowing. They're hanging on for dear life. One of them is clearly praying in the boat. It's terrifying. But when you look closely at Rembrandt's painting, you realize that he doesn't have 13 people in the boat, that is Jesus and 12 disciples, but there's a 14th person there. And you look closely and you begin to recognize a familiar face with a familiar hat on. And this 14th person is holding the hat on to keep it from blowing off in the wind and the storm, holding on to the rigging of the boat and looking straight out of the painting, the only character looking straight out of the painting, as if to say, you're in this boat too. And of course that 14th person is Rembrandt himself. He painted himself in the boat. He wants to say that we're all in the boat. We all find ourselves in that boat. We find ourselves in the storm, tossed around, wondering, are we alone in this? Is Christ asleep at the switch? What's going on here? Do I have the resources to even get through this? He paints himself and he paints us by extension into that same boat, because all of us find ourselves at one time or another in that boat where fear is. And there are all kinds of storms. I don't even have to name those for you. You know what they are. The things that make us most fearful: death itself, debilitating illness, the loss of a job, perhaps the not knowing what tomorrow will hold because there's some big uncertainty in life. There are all kinds of storms. There are all kinds of things that can lead us to wonder, are we alone in this? Does God even care? Is he off sleeping someplace? Do I have what it takes to get through this? Do I have the resources? And so the storm without begins to roar within as well. And fear can be so corrosive to relationships. Fear can be so corrosive to our own sense of confidence and our own ability to face the storms, the very thing that we're afraid of. The fear within, that storm within, can make it worse. There is a story by Victor Hugo called 93. It's a story about a ship that is tossed by a storm at sea. And in the midst of this terrible storm, the sailors are horrified to hear down below the deck a terrible crashing sound. And they know immediately what it is, because part of the cargo of the ship is a cannon, and the cannon has broken loose, and it's rolling, and it's hitting the sides of the ship. And suddenly they know that the danger within is far worse than the danger without. Somebody has to go down and secure the cannon, and two sailors do that. But they know the danger within is worse than the danger without. FDR said back during the Great Depression, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. It is fear that can be, when it becomes the main point of life, debilitating. When our lives are oriented by fear rather than faith. When our lives are guided by, directed by fear rather than faith or trust. That's when we get in trouble. That's when we react to fear in at least one of a couple of ways. So I was thinking about an image for this week, how we react to fear. I thought about our two dogs. Susan and I are dog lovers, and we have two dogs. Our first dog that we got is a Yorkie Poo, and he weighs 5.5 pounds. Now, when I got Jack, his name is Jack, when we got the Yorkie Poo, some of my friends and colleagues, namely the Reverend Linda McDermott, made fun of me. "Wow, that's a manly dog," she said. So I lived with that for a while, and we got another dog who weighs 85 pounds. and he's a Labradoodle. And our dogs have an interesting way of dealing with fear. And I think in some ways they are sort of canine parables for how we can deal with it too, and how we do deal with it. The other day I took Jack, the little one, to the vet, and Jack, of course, immediately when he knew where we were headed, he started whining and crying just like he was in horrible pain. He just in misery because of the fear he has of going to the vet. And when I got into the vet's office and I'm in the waiting area, Jack jumped out of my lap and tried to head for the door. And he knew he couldn't open that door or get out, but he just didn't know what to do with himself. He just was terrified. And the only thing that would give him any level of comfort was if I held him and talked to him and reminded him constantly that he wasn't alone in this. Our dog Teddy doesn't mind going to the vet. That's no big deal for him. But Teddy doesn't like other dogs, and especially other big dogs. And especially when he is surprised or when another dog approaches, Teddy, in fear, immediately tries to bite. He is a fear biter, they call it. He's a very gentle dog. He loves people and children and all these great, and he's happy. But if a big dog approaches, and especially if he is surprised, he reacts, he lashes out. And so what we've had to learn, because really you don't train dogs, they train you. Everybody knows that. And when you work with someone who is a trainer, they train you more than they do the dog. And so what they trained us to do when another dog approaches is to pull him close and put him right against our leg so he knows everything's okay. He knows that we're there with him. And it helps quite a bit. It has made a difference for Teddy. So there are those two reactions. One is this sort of chaotic, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, and you try to run for it and you don't know what to do, and confusion, and the chaos becomes worse. It's panic. The disciples really seem to be in that mode. They're afraid that it's all over and they don't know what to do, and they feel completely at the end of their rope, and they feel completely and utterly alone in that. And then Jesus reminds them they're not alone. And it makes a big difference. When he says, "Peace, be still," it says that he's speaking to the sea, but he's also speaking to them. And he's speaking to the early church, and he's speaking to you and to me as well. And then there's Teddy's reaction. Bite first, ask questions later. Fear can do that to us too. Thomas Merton said, "Fear is the root of all wars, most conflicts." And it is. Fear can cause us to lash out. It can cause us to bite first and ask questions later. It can cause us to make terrible decisions when we act out of fear. And so there is this call in this story to faith in the presence of the kind of doubt that says, I'm alone in this, I don't have the resources to handle this, that leads to that, oh no, oh no, oh no, what am I going to do? Or that leads to lashing out of fear. Faith is the answer to that deep sense of trust, that knowledge that we're not alone. And so when we embrace faith like that, it is as though we are once again being held close to God, pulled close to God, reminded that we're not alone, reminded that there are resources outside of ourselves and there are resources within ourselves that can get us through the storm that we are experiencing. Trust. Faith. The prayer of St. Francis says, where there is doubt, faith. Where there is doubt, let me sow faith, as a sower sows seeds. Where there is that doubt that that says, oh, you're alone in this. That doubt that says, why would you ever think God has any control over any of this? That doubt that says, you don't have the resources within yourself to handle this. The prayer that we're praying is, let us be those who sow the seeds of faith, of that deep trust. Where there is doubt, let me sow faith. Where I have doubt that becomes overpowering, let me open myself to God's peace and receive the seeds of faith and trust myself. That's what our prayer is. Sometimes when people don't understand the role of faith or what faith even means, and what its opposite is, as a matter of fact, then they can say strange things, write strange things that are not necessarily helpful when they have the best intentions. I want to close with a piece that is a response to such a letter. There's a letter written to a young man named Steve, and his friend Scott Bader Say writes about this in a Christian Century article from a few years ago. The title of the article is, Does God Protect Us? And he tells the story of this young man named Steve who was dying of cancer. And Steve received a well-intentioned but very hurtful letter from someone who suggested that if he just had more faith, you hear it? Faith, that God might yet heal him. Now, far from providing comfort, it hurt. It struck him like a hot iron because it was so judgmental. But he answered with the help of his twin brother, who helped him write the letter because Steve by then was too weak to do it. He drafted a letter as a reply to that person's letter. And I want to read his words. And think about the prayer of St. Francis. Where there is doubt, the doubt that leads to fear, let me sow faith. I share your faith in the almighty power of God to heal and sustain us. There may be times, though, when God's greatest miracle is not the miracle of physical healing, but the miracle of giving us strength in the face of suffering. As I read the Bible, God's promise is to remove all our suffering in the next life, though not necessarily in this one. In this world, we will sometimes weep, suffer, and die. And then he quotes Revelation. But in the New Jerusalem, God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. I sincerely hope that if my cancer continues to grow, no one will see it as a failure of my faith in God, but that perhaps people can see me as faithful even if I die while I am still young. I do not claim to understand God's will, but I do know that I'm in God's hands, whether in life or in death. That's his letter. He echoes Paul's words, whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. Where there is doubt, where there is debilitating fear, where life is directed in that way, let us be those who sow faith, trust. Amen.